Just what are your plans for the off season and possibly playing or just doing individual workouts?
Yeah, I mean, probably take a little bit of a break here, just for maybe a week. I don't really want to lose a ton of the stuff I've worked on, and just trying to get my body back to full health. There's some USA basketball stuff I need to get ready for.
Imagine being so powerful that one sentence could change the future of your entire franchise. Not a veteran, not a champion, just a rookie, barely 1 year into her career, already rewriting the rules of professional basketball. Because that's exactly what just happened in Indiana. Caitlin Clark, the most talked about athlete in women's sports, has reportedly issued an ultimatum to her own team. Not to the league, not to the media, but directly to the Indiana Fever's front office. And the message was crystal clear. Keep my people, or I'm gone. Now, it's not unusual for superstars to want influence over their team. LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, even Michael Jordan all had pull. But Caitlin Clark? She's not even out of her rookie deal yet, and already she's forcing the kind of decision that could define the entire franchise. This isn't about ego. It's not about drama for headlines. What's unfolding behind the scenes is something much bigger. A power play that's shaking the foundation of the WNBA itself. Because for the first time, we're watching a rookie test just how much control a player can have, not through championships, but through pure star power. And the craziest part? It's working. Insiders claim Clark has quietly made it clear to management that if two of her closest teammates, Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull, weren't brought back for the next season, she would reevaluate her future with the team. That single move sent a shockwave across the league. Executives were stunned. Analysts called it unprecedented. And fans? They were split right down the middle. Some called her bold. Others called her entitled. But no one could ignore the message. Caitlin Clark isn't just the face of women's basketball. She's the one rewriting its playbook. So how did we get here? How did a 22-year-old rookie go from college superstar to one of the most powerful voices in the WNBA, capable of bending her own franchise to her will? Because to understand what's happening now, you need to see how this story started and how one player turned fame into leverage in a way no one saw coming. It started as a whisper, the kind of quiet rumor that usually fades in a few hours. But this one didn't fade. It spread. From training camps to front offices, everyone in the WNBA started asking the same question. Did Caitlin Clark really threaten to leave the Fever? At first, it sounded impossible. Clark had only been in the league for 1 season. She was the golden child of women's basketball, the face of the league's biggest ratings boom, the player fans were calling the Steph Curry of the WNBA. She had every reason to play it safe, to keep her head down, and build her legacy the traditional way. But that's not who Caitlin Clark is. Behind the polished interviews and the superstar image, insiders describe her as laser-focused, hyper-competitive, and unafraid to take control when she feels something isn't right. And when she found out 2 of her most trusted teammates, Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull, might be leaving in free agency, she didn't hesitate. According to multiple reports, Clark's camp delivered a message directly to the Indiana Fever's front office. It wasn't public, it wasn't dramatic, and it definitely wasn't a request. It was a demand. Keep them, or risk losing me. Those 6 words were enough to send shockwaves through the organization. For a franchise that had struggled for years before Clark's arrival, losing her wasn't even an option. The Fever went from near-empty arenas to sold-out crowds the moment she was drafted. Every jersey sale, every sponsorship, every broadcast deal, it all revolved around her. She wasn't just a player, she was the brand. So when that ultimatum hit the table, it didn't sound like arrogance.
It sounded like leverage, the kind that comes with being the single most valuable athlete in an entire league. The irony is that none of this was supposed to happen this soon. In professional sports, player power is something you earn over years of championships, accolades, and influence. But Clark had short-circuited that timeline. Her popularity was so overwhelming that she didn't need rings or MVPs to have authority. Her value was her magnetism, and the Fever's front office knew it. To understand just how much power she holds, you only have to look at the numbers. Before Clark arrived, the Indiana Fever were struggling to sell tickets. Within weeks of her signing, they were selling out every home game. Their merchandise sales skyrocketed by more than 200%. National TV networks that rarely broadcast WNBA games suddenly couldn't get enough. Clark didn't just change the team's fortunes, she changed the league's trajectory. That's why this ultimatum wasn't dismissed. It was taken seriously, terrifyingly seriously. The message behind it was simple. If Clark wasn't happy, the entire machine could fall apart, and the Fever couldn't afford that. But here's where things get interesting. This wasn't just about friendship or loyalty. Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull weren't just Clark's favorite teammates. They were part of her system. The three of them had developed an on-court chemistry that defined the Fever's late-season success. Hull's sharpshooting gave Clark room to operate, while Cunningham brought toughness, leadership, and a veteran edge. Together, they balanced Clark's fast-paced playmaking with stability and grit. From Clark's point of view, losing them wasn't just emotional, it was strategic suicide. She saw it as dismantling the foundation she needed to win. So this wasn't a player begging for her friends to stay. This was a young leader identifying what worked and daring her bosses to disagree. The situation quickly escalated. Front office insiders began whispering that meetings between Clark's camp and general manager Amber Cox had become unusually tense. Management wanted flexibility. Clark wanted certainty. They talked about salary caps, free agency, and roster options. But beneath all that business talk, one reality was clear. Caitlin Clark was now calling the shots. That's something the WNBA has never seen before. A rookie treating her franchise like a business partner instead of an employer. It was bold, calculated, and risky. If this move backfired, Clark could have been labeled difficult or entitled. But if it worked, it would cement her as the most influential player in the modern WNBA.
And by all accounts, it worked. Reports suggest that the Fever's front office quietly adjusted their off-season strategy almost immediately after Clark's message. Suddenly, the tone around Hull and Cunningham shifted. Negotiations that seemed dead were revived. The word priority started appearing in internal discussions. It was a quiet victory, one that most players never get to experience, let alone in their first professional year. But as Clark celebrated behind closed doors, the ripple effects of her ultimatum were just beginning to spread. Because every time a star breaks a rule in sports, someone else pays the price. And in this case, her demand to protect two players could soon put another, one of the Fever's longest-standing veterans, directly in the crossfire. And what happened next would test not only Clark's influence, but her legacy. To really understand how Caitlin Clark became powerful enough to issue an ultimatum at all, you have to rewind, not to last season, but to the cultural storm that started long before she ever put on a Fever jersey. Because Caitlin Clark didn't just enter the WNBA, she ignited it. Before her, women's basketball had loyal fans, but few outside that circle were paying attention. Then came Clark at Iowa, raining three-pointers from half-court like it was nothing. The kind of range that made you gasp mid-shot. The kind of confidence that made every game feel like a movie. She wasn't just talented, she was the show. Every time she stepped on the court, numbers went up. Ticket sales, viewership, merchandise.
Iowa's games were selling out arenas across the country, not just in their home state. Networks started moving schedules just to air her games in prime time. She was the reason thousands of young girls wore 22 on their shirts, the reason celebrities started showing up courtside at women's college games for the first time ever. By the time she declared for the WNBA draft, it wasn't about whether she'd go number 1. It was about how many records she'd break before the draft even started. And when the Indiana Fever called her name, the entire league changed overnight. Within weeks, the Fever went from struggling to sell 2,000 tickets a night to selling out every arena they played in. Opponents had to move games to bigger venues just to fit the crowds coming to see her. It wasn't about Indiana anymore. It was about Caitlin. Her debut game pulled in viewership numbers rivaling the NBA. Every highlight was trending within minutes. Every quote, every photo, every moment viral. Overnight, the WNBA had its first true global superstar. And that's when something incredible happened. Caitlin Clark stopped being just a player. She became a brand. Endorsements came flooding in: Nike, State Farm, Gatorade. Every major company wanted her face, her voice, her presence. And it wasn't just because of her game, it was her story. The fiery underdog energy, the competitive edge, and the visible emotion every time she played. She wasn't manufactured or polished, she was real. But here's the twist. The same authenticity that made her beloved by fans also made her unpredictable behind closed doors. She didn't think like a rookie, she thought like a CEO. When Clark arrived in Indiana, she wasn't there to fit in, she was there to win. She studied film obsessively, demanded extra practice time, and pushed teammates to match her intensity. Some found it inspiring, others found it intimidating, but no one could deny she had completely reset the culture of that locker room. For a franchise that had spent years in mediocrity, that change was everything. Suddenly, the Fever were national news. They weren't just another small market team, they were the most watched, most talked about team in the league. That's the level of impact Clark brought. It wasn't slow or steady, it was instant. And it wasn't just her numbers on the stat sheet. Sure, she was dropping 20 points and dishing out 8 assists tonight, but her real value came from the economy she built around her name. Every camera followed her, every highlight package revolved around her, every network's ratings spiked when she played. In business terms, Caitlin Clark became the WNBA's single most valuable asset, and she knew it. That's why her ultimatum hit so hard, because she wasn't threatening from a place of ego, she was operating from cold, calculated reality. She understood her worth in a way few rookies ever have. It's rare for any player to have that kind of self-awareness. Most stars spend years learning how to balance influence and humility, but Clark came in understanding something fundamental about modern sports. Attention is currency. And right now, nobody in the WNBA had more of it than her. Her presence meant millions of dollars in revenue, not just for the Fever, but for the league as a whole. She'd brought a wave of new fans, new sponsors, and new expectations. So when she drew a line in the sand, she wasn't speaking as a 22-year-old guard. She was speaking as the woman who had just made the league relevant to an entirely new audience. That's the real reason the Fever listened. Because losing Caitlin Clark isn't just losing a player, it's losing momentum. But power, as all athletes learn, always comes with consequences. The higher you rise, the louder the whispers get. And while Clark's influence grew off the court, another kind of storm was building behind the scenes, one rooted not in fame, but in finance. Because as unstoppable as Clark's rise was, the WNBA salary structure wasn't built for superstars like her. And what came next would expose the limits of that system and force the Fever into one of the toughest decisions in franchise history. For all the glitz, headlines, and sold-out arenas, there's one brutal truth about the WNBA that even its biggest stars can't escape. The money doesn't match the moment. On paper, Caitlin Clark is one of the most valuable athletes in the world right now. But inside the system she plays in, the numbers tell a completely different story. The WNBA's entire salary cap for each team in 2025? About $1.46 million. Not per player, per team. 12 players, $1.46 million. That means even the league's top superstars, the ones driving viewership, ticket sales, and brand partnerships, can't earn more than $241,000 a year. That's the league maximum. For comparison, that's roughly what a bench warmer in the NBA earns every few days. And here's where it gets complicated. When every dollar counts, keeping a roster together becomes a chess game played with razor blades. So when the Fever's front office sat down after the season, they had a problem no amount of hype could solve. They weren't just managing players, they were managing survival. Clark was locked in as the team's centerpiece, alongside Aaliyah Boston, another young star and Rookie of the Year, whose presence guaranteed a heavy salary commitment. Add in Kelsey Mitchell, the franchise's longtime all-star guard, and suddenly the math started breaking down. Because under that tiny salary cap, you can't have everything. You can't keep all your stars, all your shooters, all your chemistry pieces. Something has to go. And that something was about to be Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull. Both were due for new contracts. Both had proven themselves indispensable during the Fever's resurgence, but neither was cheap anymore, not in WNBA terms. Each commanded a mid-tier salary that in any other league would be pocket change, but here could wreck a team's entire budget. That's the cruel irony of the WNBA's success. The better players perform, the harder it becomes to keep them. Behind closed doors, Fever executives were running scenarios. If they re-signed Cunningham, they'd have to cut depth elsewhere. If they matched offers for Lexie Hull, a restricted free agent expected to draw heavy interest, they'd risk losing the financial flexibility needed to re-sign Kelsey Mitchell. Every version of the roster ended with someone being left behind. Publicly, the organization stayed optimistic. Press releases and interviews painted a picture of unity and momentum. "We want everyone back," they said. "This is just the start." But privately, the numbers told a much darker story. According to team insiders, spreadsheets were drawn up showing exactly who could be sacrificed to make the math work. Every player had a dollar value next to her name. And when the final version was circulated, two names were quietly marked red: Lexie Hull and Sophie Cunningham. The plan was to let Hull walk free agency. If another team offered her more than Indiana could match, they'd let her walk. Cunningham, as an unrestricted free agent, was also likely gone. The Fever's management believed they could rebuild around Clark in Boston while patching the rest of the roster with cheaper contracts. It was efficient, logical, cold. And under normal circumstances, it might have worked. But this isn't a normal franchise anymore. Not when Caitlin Clark is on the roster. Because while the front office was analyzing numbers, Clark was analyzing chemistry, the kind of on-court trust you can't replace with spreadsheets. She knew exactly how Hull's shooting opened the floor for her drives. She knew how Cunningham's toughness and veteran presence balanced her high-speed style. She wasn't looking at salaries, she was looking at winning. And that's where the storm began. When the internal discussions about letting Hull and Cunningham go reached Clark's circle, the tone changed immediately. It wasn't just disappointment, it was defiance. Clark wasn't going to watch her foundation crumble for the sake of budget flexibility. She'd seen this movie before, franchises choosing numbers over loyalty, and she wasn't about to be another victim of it. That's when her camp delivered the message: keep them, or find out what happens when you don't. Suddenly, Indiana's front office was trapped between two impossible choices. If they stood firm, they risked alienating the most important athlete in the league. But if they gave in, they'd blow their cap strategy and possibly lose Kelsey Mitchell, the team's longest-standing cornerstone. This is what it means to live inside the WNBA's financial pressure cooker. Every decision ripples in a dozen directions. Every signature changes the future. The Fever were facing a lose-lose situation, and Caitlin Clark had just lit the fuse. But this was more than just a money problem. The real shock came when the details of those decisions started to leak, when the players themselves began to realize what was happening behind the curtain. Because that's when a simple salary decision turned into something much deeper, a betrayal. It started quietly. No headlines, no statements, no press conferences. Just a series of hushed meetings inside the Indiana Fever offices. Meetings that would never have made the news if not for one leak. According to sources close to the team, the plan to let Lexie Hull walk was already in motion long before the season ended. It wasn't personal, it was math. As a restricted free agent, Hull's contract allowed other teams to make offers that Indiana could match. But internally, the decision was already made. They wouldn't. The front office expected Hull to get bigger offers from other franchises, offers they simply couldn't afford to match without cutting into their salary cap for 2026. So they prepared to let her go, quietly, cleanly, and without making it public. A financial move disguised as part of the process. But what they didn't count on was Caitlin Clark finding out. Because for Clark, this wasn't business, this was betrayal. Lexie Hull wasn't just another player to her, she was family.
When Clark first arrived in Indiana, it was Hull who helped her adjust, who stayed after practice to run extra shooting drills, who helped her navigate the sudden media circus, who offered stability when the spotlight got blinding. And on the court, Hull had proven her worth 100 times over. A second-round pick who was never supposed to make headlines, Hull worked her way up through sheer effort. In her rookie season, she barely saw the floor. But when injuries struck and the team's depth was tested, she stepped up, hitting clutch threes, defending top scores, and becoming the kind of glue player every winning team needs. She didn't complain, she didn't make noise, she just produced. And that's what made the front office's plan so brutal. To them, Hull was a line on a spreadsheet. To Clark, she was the kind of player who made her job possible. The chemistry between them wasn't something you could replicate with analytics. It was instinctive, earned through long nights in the gym, shared frustrations, and unspoken trust. So when Clark learned that Hull was being quietly pushed out to save money, it cut deep. She didn't yell, she didn't go public. Instead, she made a decision to take control of the narrative before management could. And this is where the story begins to sound less like sports and more like politics. Because as Clark's camp started making calls, the whispers reached the media. Not directly, but subtly. Suddenly, rumors began to swirl online. Caitlin Clark unhappy with Fever management. Clark intervenes in team decisions. Possible tension brewing behind the scenes. The timing wasn't a coincidence, it was pressure. By the time the first report hit sports talk shows, the Fever's front office was on its heels. What had started as a quiet off-season maneuver now looked like betrayal in the public eye. Fans were angry, journalists were circling, and Caitlin Clark's name was trending again, not for her stats, but for her power. And right in the middle of it all stood another player, Sophie Cunningham. If Lexie Hull's situation was painful, Cunningham's was even more complicated. She wasn't drafted by Indiana. She'd been traded mid-season from Phoenix, a tough, scrappy guard known for her edge, her leadership, and her unapologetic confidence. When she joined the Fever, her chemistry with Clark was instant. On the court, Cunningham's toughness complemented Clark's finesse. Off the court, her veteran presence gave the locker room a backbone. She was exactly the kind of player every young superstar needs beside them, part mentor, part enforcer, part sister. And now she too was about to be cut loose. Her contract had expired, and while she'd publicly expressed her desire to stay, the reality was grim.
The Fever's cap space was evaporating, and Cunningham's market value was higher than what Indiana could afford. Once again, the front office was ready to move on, quietly, efficiently. But Clark wasn't going to let that happen twice. Insiders say she made her position crystal clear. Both Hull and Cunningham needed to stay. Not one, both. If that meant sacrificing flexibility, so be it. If it meant pushing the team into uncomfortable financial waters, she didn't care. Because for Clark, this wasn't about friendship anymore, it was about control. She wanted to build her version of the Fever, one built around trust, familiarity, and chemistry. She'd seen what happens when franchises ignore star players. She wasn't about to watch it happen again. And the front office knew exactly what that meant. Losing Clark, even hypothetically, wasn't an option. The entire league revolved around her now. But by the time they began to reconsider, it was too late to contain the fallout. The narrative was already out there. The Fever tried to cut Clark's people loose. Fans took sides. Some accused the team of disloyalty. Others argued Clark was overstepping, acting like a general manager before earning it. Sports pundits filled entire segments debating whether she was the LeBron of the WNBA or just another rookie blinded by her own stardom. The truth, as always, was somewhere in the middle. Clark's intervention wasn't about ego, it was about stability. She knew how fragile chemistry could be in a league where contracts expire as quickly as headlines. She'd seen teams implode from one bad decision, one wrong cut, one business move too many. So she stepped in, and in doing so, she crossed a line that most rookies don't even know exists, the invisible barrier between player and management. Her ultimatum wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of power. And for the Fever's front office, it was a moment of reckoning. Because for the first time, they weren't just running a team, they were negotiating with a phenomenon. And while Caitlin Clark may have won this round, saving her trusted teammates and solidifying her control, her move came with consequences that no one could ignore. Because in the shadows of her victory, another player who had carried the Fever for years before Clark ever arrived was about to face the cost of her rise. A veteran, a leader, a star in her own right, Kelsey Mitchell. And her future? It just got a lot more uncertain. By the time the tension reached its boiling point, it was no longer rumor, it was reality. The Indiana Fever's front office had been called into a private series of meetings, not by the league, not by ownership, but by the camp of a 22-year-old rookie who had been in the WNBA for less than a full season. And that rookie was dictating the tone of the conversation.
According to multiple reports, Caitlin Clark's representatives, including her agent and a small circle of advisors, sat down with General Manager Amber Cox to discuss what was described publicly as future roster alignment. But behind closed doors, insiders say it was something else entirely. A showdown. Clark's team came in prepared. They had data on fan attendance, TV ratings, merchandise sales, sponsorship impact, even social media analytics. They didn't need to raise their voices because the numbers spoke louder than any argument could. When Clark played, the Fever made money. When she didn't, they didn't. Simple as that. That leverage, that undeniable, measurable influence was their weapon. So when the discussion turned to free agency, her camp didn't mince words. They wanted assurances, not vague promises, not PR spin, guarantees. According to one insider, the tone was polite but firm. Clark wasn't threatening to walk in a dramatic sense. She wasn't pounding tables or issuing ultimatums in front of cameras. It was quieter than that, scarier even. Her message was simple. If you let Hull or Cunningham go, don't expect me to stay long-term. The Fever's executives were stunned. They'd seen star players use their influence before, but never someone this young, this early, this deliberate. It was a move straight out of the LeBron James playbook, except LeBron had years of championships and MVPs to back it up.
Caitlin Clark was wielding that same power after a single rookie season. And the shocking part? She wasn't bluffing. People close to Clark describe her as intensely loyal, but also strategic. She's not emotional when it comes to business decisions. When she feels disrespected, she doesn't complain, she recalibrates. She knows exactly how much she means to the franchise, and she's not afraid to use that power to build the situation she wants. That's what made this confrontation different. It wasn't about drama or control, it was about vision. Clark doesn't see herself as just a player trying to win games. She sees herself as the foundation for something bigger, a dynasty, a legacy, a movement that reshapes how women's sports operate. And for that vision to work, she believes the people around her need to share the same chemistry, the same discipline, and the same trust. From her perspective, losing Hull or Cunningham wasn't just a loss of teammates, it was a fracture in the system she was building. But for the front office, this was uncharted territory. Never before had a player, let alone one on a rookie deal, walked into the GM's office and effectively vetoed personnel decisions. Amber Cox and her team had two options: either hold firm, assert organizational control, and risk alienating the player who had just revived their franchise, or bend the knee, not out of fear, but out of survival. They chose the second option. The Fever quietly shifted their off-season priorities. Contracts that had once been labeled non-essential were suddenly being reevaluated. Negotiations with Hull and Cunningham were reopened, and new salary models were being drawn up to keep both women on the roster. It wasn't announced publicly, of course. These kinds of compromises never are. But behind the scenes, everyone knew what had just happened. Caitlin Clark had walked into the front office and effectively changed the trajectory of the franchise. And once you've crossed that line, once a player realizes their power extends beyond the court, there's no going back. The comparison to LeBron James wasn't just a media narrative anymore. It was real. Like LeBron, Clark wasn't waiting to be given control. She was taking it. But while LeBron had earned that influence after years of championships and MVPs, Clark's came from something different: market value. She wasn't wielding trophies or stats. She was wielding attention. And in modern sports, attention is currency. The Fever knew it, the league knew it, even her teammates knew it. The balance of power had shifted. And yet, behind all the boldness and control, there was one truth that Clark herself couldn't ignore. Power always comes with a price. Because for every player she saved, someone else was going to lose. And the player caught in the crossfire wasn't just anyone. It was the woman who had held this franchise for years before Caitlin Clark arrived. Her name was Kelsey Mitchell, and she had been the Indiana Fever beating heart long before Clark became its face. And now, Clark's victory might cost Mitchell her future. When the dust settled after Caitlin Clark's quiet confrontation with management, not everyone was celebrating. For two players, Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull, the ultimatum meant security, a second chance, a lifeline they hadn't expected. But for one veteran, the one player who had held this franchise together through years of losing seasons and empty arenas, it meant something else entirely. It meant uncertainty. That veteran was Kelsey Mitchell. For nearly a decade, Mitchell was the Indiana Fever. Drafted second overall in 2018, she came into the league as a scoring machine, undersized but fearless, the kind of player who never flinched under pressure. Through losing streaks, front office changes, coaching chaos, and dwindling fan support, she stayed, she worked, she showed up every night, When attendance dropped to record lows, Mitchell was still there, giving everything she had to a franchise that couldn't seem to find its footing. She wasn't a household name outside the WNBA, not yet, but inside the league, she was respected, a professional's professional, a leader who never complained, no matter how heavy the load became. And then, in 2024, everything changed. Caitlin Clark arrived, a once-in-a-generation rookie whose star power rewrote the rules of women's basketball overnight. The cameras followed Clark, the fans wore her jersey, the headlines became hers, and in the background, Kelsey Mitchell, the face of the team for years, quietly stepped aside, choosing not to make it about ego. She accepted the changing of the guard with grace. But now, that grace might cost her everything. Because when Clark delivered her ultimatum, keep Hull and Cunningham or risk losing me, it forced the Fever into an impossible corner. Their salary cap was already maxed out. They couldn't afford to keep everyone. And the easiest way to make the math work was to sacrifice Kelsey Mitchell. For the first time in her career, Mitchell's future in Indiana was uncertain. It wasn't performance. She was still one of the league's top scorers, still averaging nearly 20 points a game. It wasn't attitude. She was beloved by teammates, respected by coaches, admired by fans. It was something colder, arithmetic. Mitchell's veteran salary carried weight. In a league where the total cap barely scratched $1.5 million, her contract took up a sizable chunk. And now, with Clark demanding the retention of two mid-tier contracts, Hull and Cunningham, something had to give. Inside the locker room, the tension was palpable. Clark's younger teammates admired her confidence, her leadership, her willingness to fight for what she believed in. But the veterans, they saw the shift. They saw how power had quietly changed hands, how the front office now moved in sync with the desires of a rookie, no matter what that meant for those who came before her. Kelsey Mitchell never spoke out publicly. She didn't make cryptic posts or give emotional interviews. That wasn't her style. But behind the scenes, people close to the team say she felt the sting. She had been there through the hard years, through the rebuilds and rebrands. And now, after carrying the team when no one else would, she was the one left waiting, watching as decisions were made without her name ever being mentioned. It's the cruel paradox of professional sports. Loyalty has no salary slot. To the front office, it was simple business. To Mitchell, it was a message. That message? The new era has arrived, and you're no longer part of the plan. And that's what makes this moment so complex, because Caitlin Clark wasn't wrong to want stability. She wasn't wrong to want her teammates, the ones who understood her game, her rhythm, her drive. But in securing her inner circle, she inadvertently created a fracture inside her own team. Mitchell and Clark should have been the perfect duo. Clark's playmaking paired with Mitchell's scoring could have been unstoppable, a 1-2 punch that defined the next decade of WNBA basketball. But chemistry isn't built in stats, it's built in trust. And when a player sees her years of loyalty overshadowed by another's influence, that trust starts to crack. Fans began noticing the shift too. Online debates turned fierce. Was Caitlin Clark empowering herself or overstepping? Was the front office making the right call or abandoning their veteran leader? Was this about basketball or about politics? There were no easy answers. Because what's happening in Indiana isn't just a team dispute, it's a collision between the old WNBA and the new one. Kelsey Mitchell represents the era of players who earned everything through quiet resilience, who endured without leverage, without exposure, without power. Caitlin Clark represents the new generation, stars who know their worth from day one, who understand that popularity is leverage, and who aren't afraid to use it. And somewhere between those two worlds lies the painful truth of this moment. Every movement forward leaves someone behind. Mitchell's situation became the emotional fault line of the Fever's transformation. She wasn't being benched, but she was being replaced not by talent, but by timing, by a younger, louder era of empowerment that doesn't wait its turn. And the most heartbreaking part, Kelsey Mitchell helped build the foundation that made Caitlin Clark's rise possible. She kept the lights on when no one was watching. And now, as those lights shine brighter than ever before, she's standing in the shadows of her own legacy. But this story isn't just about one player being pushed aside. It's about the ripple effect of Clark's revolution. Because the power she's wielding inside Indiana is now echoing across the entire league. And it's forcing everyone, players, executives, even fans, to ask a single uncomfortable question. What happens when one player becomes bigger than the game itself? What Caitlin Clark has done in Indiana isn't just a story about one team or one player. It's the reflection of a cultural shift that's been building for years. A shift that's been quietly reshaping professional sports, one contract and one headline at a time. Because make no mistake, Clark's ultimatum wasn't born out of ego. It was born out of evolution.
For decades, women athletes have been told to stay in line, to be grateful for opportunity, to trust management and earn their say. They were expected to perform, smile, and stay silent. Power was something that existed in boardrooms and locker rooms, never in the hands of players themselves. But that era is ending, and Caitlin Clark might be its tipping point. What makes her story so defining isn't just her success, it's when she chose to use her voice. Most players wait years before asserting influence. They let the system mold them before they ever try to reshape it. Clark, on the other hand, walked into the WNBA and immediately treated herself like a stakeholder, not an employee. And in doing so, she shattered an invisible ceiling that's existed since the league's creation. Her power isn't traditional. It doesn't come from championships or veteran tenure. It comes from cultural gravity. She's the face of a generation that doesn't separate fame from leverage. Her followers, her sponsorships, her global visibility, those are tools, not accessories. When she speaks, executives listen because her presence equals profit. That's not arrogance, that's modern business. And it's not exclusive to basketball. What Clark is doing mirrors a broader transformation across all of women's sports. From Naomi Osaka controlling her narrative in tennis, to Megan Rapinoe leading labor negotiations in soccer, to Angel Reese and Paige Buchers capitalizing on NIL deals before turning pro, this is the new era of athlete empowerment. The generation that grew up watching LeBron James engineer his own destiny isn't waiting to be given permission. They're seizing it. But in the WNBA, this kind of power has always been harder to claim. Lower salaries, smaller budgets, and limited exposure meant players often had to choose between passion and survival. Many had off-season jobs or overseas contracts just to make ends meet. Power in that environment was a luxury. Then Caitlin Clark arrived, and suddenly, attention became the great equalizer. She brought record-breaking viewership, sponsorship money, and a new level of mainstream media coverage that the league had never seen before. The WNBA wasn't a side conversation anymore. It was trending daily. And with that spotlight came something even more valuable than money: leverage. Leverage changes everything. It shifts the balance of decision-making, blurs the line between management and player, and redefines what it means to be a professional athlete. Caitlin Clark didn't wait to earn it. She recognized it from day one. And that recognition, that understanding of her own value, is what's rewriting the unwritten rules of the WNBA. Still, revolutions come with consequences. For every step forward in player empowerment, there's a ripple of discomfort within the old guard, the executives, coaches, and veterans who built the system that's now being challenged. To them, Clark's approach feels dangerous, too bold,
too soon. They see a league still fighting for stability and a player daring to take control before the foundation is secure. But for others, she's exactly what the WNBA has been waiting for. A catalyst, a disruptor. Proof that the league's athletes no longer have to beg for relevance. They can command it. And perhaps that's the most powerful part of this story. Caitlin Clark's ultimatum wasn't just about two teammates. It was a signal that women athletes will no longer apologize for wanting agency, control, and respect. It's a message to every young player watching. You don't need to wait to be powerful. Still, there's a delicate balance between empowerment and chaos. Because when one player holds enough influence to steer an entire franchise, it blurs the lines between leadership and control. For some, Clark is leading a revolution. For others, she's crossing into territory that could fracture team unity and challenge competitive fairness. But that's the nature of every transformation. It's uncomfortable, it's controversial, and it's necessary. Caitlin Clark isn't just fighting for her teammates. She's fighting for a generation of athletes who've been undervalued for too long. She's showing that influence isn't something you wait to receive. It's something you take when you've earned the world's attention. And whether fans love her or question her, everyone agrees on one thing. Nothing in the WNBA will ever be the same again. Because from this moment on, every rising star will remember what Caitlin Clark just proved. That in the modern era of sports, talent might make you great, but power makes you unforgettable. As Caitlin Clark quietly reshaped her own franchise, the WNBA itself was marching straight into a storm. Behind the highlight reels, record-breaking crowds, and viral headlines, a much darker reality was forming, one that threatened to pull the entire league into chaos. The collective bargaining agreement, the document that governs everything from player salaries to travel rules, was set to expire on October 31st. And with it, the fragile balance that held the WNBA together was about to be tested like never before. For most fans, the letters CBA barely register. But inside the league, those three letters mean survival. They determine how much players are paid, how teams operate, how owners spend, and how the league grows. When a CBA ends without a new deal in place, the results can be catastrophic. Lockouts, canceled games, and in some cases, entire seasons lost. And that's the exact uncertainty Caitlin Clark was walking straight into. The Players' Union, empowered by the league's newfound attention, was demanding major changes. They wanted higher salaries, better travel conditions, improved health care, and a bigger share of league revenue. These weren't luxuries, they were long overdue necessities. For years, WNBA players have been forced to fly commercial, while NBA players charter private jets. They've played back-to-back games with exhausting travel schedules, often arriving hours before tip-off. And they've watched as their league generated record sponsorships while their pay barely moved. But now the players had leverage because of one thing: growth. Viewership was exploding. Ticket sales were at an all-time high. Merchandise was selling out online within hours of new drops. Corporate sponsors were lining up to partner with the league, eager to attach their brands to its fresh energy and rising stars. And at the center of it all, the face driving this new boom was Caitlin Clark. Her influence wasn't confined to the Indiana Fever anymore. She was the league's most valuable marketing asset, the player every network wanted on their broadcasts, the reason casual fans were suddenly paying attention.
And that's what made her timing so dangerous and so brilliant. Clark's ultimatum to secure her teammates wasn't just about loyalty or chemistry. It was a preemptive strike against instability. She knew the CBA expiration could freeze rosters, delay contracts, or even lead to a lockout. And she wasn't about to let uncertainty rip apart the foundation she'd just built. So while other teams were playing the waiting game, holding off on spending until they knew what the new financial landscape would look like, Clark forced the Fever to act now. Sign her people, lock them in, Forget flexibility. Build securely before the storm hits. It was risky, yes, but it was also brilliant. Because if the CBA negotiations collapse and the 2026 season faces disruption, Clark's core group will already be under contract, immune to the chaos. And if the new deal dramatically increases salaries, the Fever will have locked in valuable players at pre-CBA prices, a potential steal in hindsight. To the outside world, it looked like emotion, but to those who understand the business of sports, it was strategy, ruthless, forward-thinking, and precise. Meanwhile, the league's executives were quietly panicking. The union's demands were steep, and while the WNBA's popularity had never been higher, its financial foundation was still fragile. Most teams still operated at a loss, sustained by ownership groups and NBA subsidies. The league's cultural momentum far outpaced its actual profit margins, and that gap was starting to crack under pressure. Behind closed doors, owners warned that a massive salary increase could destabilize smaller franchises. The union fired back that status quo was no longer acceptable. The players had given too much for too long, and they weren't going back. The tension grew daily. Negotiation meetings ran late into the night. Rumors of a potential player strike began circulating on social media. Coaches whispered about contingency plans, and through it all, the biggest question hovering over everything was simple. What happens if the league stops? If the WNBA locks out, players will scatter overseas again. Momentum will die. Sponsors will pause their deals, and everything Caitlin Clark helped build could unravel in months. That's why her timing wasn't coincidence. Clark is young, but she's not naive. She understands business as much as basketball. She's watched how men's superstars like LeBron, Curry, and Durant navigate power dynamics. When to push, when to protect their circle, when to force action before the walls close in. In many ways, this was her first major test as the face of the WNBA. Not just as a scorer or icon, but as a strategist in a volatile system. And if she's right, her actions could shield both herself and her teammates from the fallout of the league's biggest labor battle in decades. Still, not everyone sees her move as genius. Critics argue that Clark's push for immediate roster guarantees only made it harder for the Fever in an already unstable economic climate. Some league insiders even whispered that her assertiveness sent the wrong message heading into CBA talks, that it gave players a false sense of how much control they truly had, fueling unrealistic expectations for the union. But others say she's doing exactly what great leaders do, seeing the storm before it hits. Because this isn't just a negotiation, it's a reckoning. A reckoning for a league caught between two worlds, one still fighting for sustainability, the other demanding evolution. And at the center of it all stands Caitlin Clark, the player who represents both the promise and pressure of this new era. The league needs her, the fans adore her, the sponsors rely on her. And yet, with every move she makes, she reminds everyone of a truth the WNBA can no longer ignore. She's not just part of the system, she's the force rewriting it. But even as she maneuvers through boardroom politics and media storms, there's one final question hanging over this entire saga, a question that even Caitlin Clark can't control. When the system finally resets, when the chaos clears, and when the dust of negotiation settles, will the WNBA be stronger for it, or will the power she's unleashed tear it apart from within? In just one season, Caitlin Clark has done what most athletes spend entire careers trying to achieve. She's changed the conversation. Not just about her team, not just about the WNBA, but about what power looks like in sports. She came into the league as a rookie with a jump shot and a fan base. Now she stands as a force, reshaping how players are valued, how franchises operate, and how women in sports define their worth. Her ultimatum, once seen as reckless, now looks like a calculated strike in a system long overdue for disruption. By demanding loyalty, she exposed the cracks in the WNBA structure, the pay disparities, the financial fragility, the lack of long-term stability. And whether fans agree with her methods or not, the result is undeniable.
She's brought those conversations to the forefront in a way no one else could. The Indiana Fever may have bent to her will, but the ripple effects go far beyond one franchise. Across the league, players are watching, executives are watching, the media is watching. Every decision Clark makes now becomes a reference point, a case study in modern athlete empowerment. She's forcing the league to ask itself difficult questions. What happens when a player becomes more influential than the team that employs her? What happens when marketability outweighs seniority? And most importantly, is this the dawn of equality or the beginning of a new imbalance? Because the truth is, revolutions are never clean. They're messy. They create heroes and villains, winners and casualties. And Caitlin Clark's story sits right in that gray area where ambition meets disruption and power collides with principle. Some see her as a visionary, a player brave enough to challenge outdated systems and demand the respect women's athletes have deserved for decades.
Others see her as a symbol of unchecked power, proof that even good intentions can blur when the spotlight burns too bright. But maybe that's what makes this moment so fascinating. Maybe the truth isn't about right or wrong. Maybe it's about what happens when someone finally refuses to wait their turn. Because Caitlin Clark isn't just chasing championships, she's rewriting what it means to earn them. She's turned a rookie season into a statement, a negotiation into a movement, and a simple roster demand into a mirror reflecting the state of an entire sport. And love her or hate her, you can't deny this: the WNBA will never be the same again. As the league faces uncertain months ahead, CBA battles, financial reshufflings, roster upheavals, one thing is clear: Caitlin Clark's influence isn't fading, it's evolving. She's no longer just the future of women's basketball. She's its present, its power, its pulse. Because every era has its turning point. That one moment when everything that came before feels outdated and everything that comes next feels unknown. For the WNBA, that moment is now, and its name is Caitlin Clark.